Thank you so much. Good evening, Your Royal Highness and everybody else, which is kind of how my brain's seeing this room right now. Thank you, Gary, for the kind introduction. And thank you very much to the Faculty of Homeopathy for the honour of presenting this lecture tonight. So as Gary just mentioned, we're very well aware that the debate around homeopathy has been raging now for about 20 years. And this debate has focused entirely on the evidence base around homeopathy, with people arguing about whether basically we do or do not have evidence homeopathy works. So when HRI was founded in 2009, we found ourselves right at the center of this debate. And I spent most of this part of my career really trying to just get across the basic key message and truth that there is good quality scientific evidence showing homeopathy works. But I was reflecting some time ago that there was really a shift in the debate around 2022. And the way we talked about this internally at HRI was that context is everything. And what we mean by this is that if we just talk about the data we do and don't have on homeopathy, that only means so much. It means so much more if you can put that data in the proper context. So that's what I want to try and do this evening, to talk about the actual status of the evidence base of homeopathy, but by very deliberately and consciously asking the question of how does our evidence base compare to that of conventional medicine? So there have been two main efforts to map the clinical research on homeopathy. The first one was done by your well-known colleague, Dr. Robert Matthey. He focused on the randomized controlled trials of homeopathic treatment with his latest data going up to December 2023. And what we see when we look at that data set is that, of course, compared with Big Pharma's world, we have a relatively small, but also highly mixed evidence base. So what I mean by that is even though we have 286 RCTs, which is actually pretty good and far more than most people think we have, unfortunately, the challenges we have come from the fact that these are scattered across 152 different medical conditions. So that means that unfortunately, we only average around 2 trials per condition. On top of that, we have further challenges that this data set covers all different types of homeopathy. We also tend to have slightly smaller studies, so the sample size or number of patients in trials tends to be smaller, purely due to cost. And we tend to lack replications. It's quite rare in homeopathy research that you get the same trial being deliberately replicated. And in science, we really like to see this replication of studies if possible for real rigor. So what all of that adds up to is if you do a review of all the data we have on a certain medical condition, you tend to find weak evidence for homeopathy. And that is where these false claims come from, that homeopathy is not evidence-based. I should mention that Robert Matthey is famous for being very strict. He's only including the highest level of evidence here, peer-reviewed publications. He's also only looking at treatment, not prevention, and he excluded certain trials that have a weaker design, the crossover trials. I mention that because the second effort to map the evidence we have was done in a completely opposite way. This is the work of Katharina Gärtner in Germany. It's the HOMIS project, where she deliberately tried to capture every single thing we have, from the top to the bottom of the scale of quality and rigor. So her data goes up to March 2021, so a little bit older, but much broader. And this is actually being updated as we speak. This project resulted in the creation of an online searchable database hosted by the University of Bern in Switzerland and also available on the HRI website if you want to have a look at that. Katharina Gärtner found this much bigger number because of her different criteria, 636 controlled studies, but again, covering 223 different conditions. Just to talk about RCTs, so it's a little bit more similar to Robert Matthey's data, she found 463 randomized controlled trials. When I say it's broad, this does include non-peer-reviewed publications, doctoral theses, it's treatment and prevention, and she does have the crossover trials in there. But even taking this broadest possible approach, it still only brings us up to approximately 3 trials per medical condition. So again, if you just go condition by condition, it's going to come through as weak evidence. Now, something we hear a lot in this era of so-called evidence-based medicine is people saying treatments have to be evidence-based. And I think most people really believe conventional drugs are proven, but homeopathy is not. But of course, the reality is far less black and white than that. In reality, conventional medicine faces many similar challenges to homeopathy in terms of the evidence base. A study was conducted looking at a sample of 100 Cochrane reviews of conventional medicine. So these are widely acknowledged to be the best quality reviews that you can get, where you gather together all the individual trials on a certain topic and combine them to draw firmer conclusions. What this study found was that 39% of these reviews only include between 1 and 5 RCTs. That is exactly the same as homeopathy if you go by condition. But the thing that really, really surprised me was that they found that only 6% of RCDs of conventional medicine were high quality. I honestly thought it would be a lot higher than that. So what this tells us is that many conventional medical treatments have weak evidence too. Now, when we say that, the wording scientists would use is that the intervention comes through grade analysis as low level of confidence. So what do we mean by grade? I'm mentioning this because this is really at the center of how evidence is reviewed and summarized these days. GRADE provides a framework for evaluating and summarizing multiple studies together. And with this tool, the researchers will generate a level of certainty in the results that you're finding in a review. And the whole purpose of GRADE, and this is really important to stress, is that it was originally developed to help researchers inform clinical recommendations. It was all about synthesizing data to inform clinical guidelines, basically. And crucially, it was designed for analysis of groups of studies that test the same intervention for the same clinical outcome, whether that's the duration of cough in bronchitis or the duration of a fever in an ear infection, same treatment, same symptom stroke outcome. And what GRADE does is basically ask the question, how likely is it that the result we're seeing from these trials is true based on multiple factors? Now, tonight's not the time, especially at this time of night, to go through this in detail, but you can imagine some of the things that go into this calculation, if you like. The obvious thing of what's the quality of each individual study, but also I want to pick out imprecision. So this is the way they talk about how many patients were involved in these trials. And crucially, it's the group sample size that's taken into account here, not the size of each individual trial. In GRADE analysis, if your group of studies has less than 400 people in it, you get downgraded. So for each of these criteria, they downgrade you or occasionally upgrade you, and you come out with a result at the end. It generates what they call a level of confidence in the results that you're seeing: high, moderate, low, or very low. Now, to explain this better, I always think it's easier with an example. So if we look at the allergic rhinitis evidence base, doesn't matter, it was 2015 because it hasn't changed very much since then. This is the condition for which, as far as I know, we have the most individual studies on one condition. So we think, oh, this could be good for GRADE. We've got a bulk of data here. This should be good. But here we go, covering 9 different homeopathic treatments. Within that, if we just look at the isopathy trials, where we are creating a homeopathic medicine from the causative agent, here's the 8 different isopathy trials. You can see here we've got single remedies, we've got a complex remedy, we've got 5 different treatments. We've got dust, pollen, individualized immunotherapy, birch, grass, trees, weeds. It's a bit of a mix here, really. And then on top of that, this is very normal in science, we've got a mixture of results. So we've got positive trend, we've got inconclusive and negative. So just, I hope to get across from this without dwelling on the details, you can see how heterogeneous our data sets can be. And that doesn't come through GRADE very well because we're looking for same study, same treatment, same outcome. We're looking for consistency. So it's worth considering what happens if we go to the other end of the spectrum in terms of our evidence base per condition. Many of you will be aware of our most cohesive set of data, and that's the wonderful work that was done by Jennifer Jacobs in the US on the treatment of diarrhea in children back in the 90s and early 2000s. She conducted 3 double-blind placebo-controlled trials, a small pilot study to test everything. When that went well, she did 2 more full-blown RCTs. Same treatment, same outcome. So this is great because now she can combine them in a meta-analysis to give firmer conclusions. When that last step was completed, it became clear that individualized homeopathy was more effective than placebo, with the duration of the diarrhea being reduced by 2/3, and it reached statistical significance, so not due to chance. So this is a really clear, strong result. So you might be thinking, perhaps this actually gets through grade pretty well. Unfortunately, the combined group of studies is only 252 people. So remembering that 400 threshold, even this data set gets downgraded in grade analysis. There are also some other issues where it loses a few points. And this is the situation we face today. Studies that are really good, really strong, really clear, but they were done a long time ago and now being judged using a tool that was invented in 2012. So there was no threshold of numbers back then. It didn't matter, if you know what I mean. It was not considered a reason to downgrade this. So older studies judged by modern day tools is a problem for us. But if I'm saying context is everything, then how often do conventional treatments pass grade analysis? And I know other people don't say pass or fail, but that's how I think of it because of trying to sort of get this straight in my own brain. A really interesting study was done which looked at Cochrane reviews using this approach over a certain time period. And what they found was that if you just start by looking at this level of evidence, the quality, so it doesn't matter whether the trials were positive or negative, we're just saying what was the quality of the body of evidence. Only 13.5% of these reviews of conventional medicine were considered high quality. But that's not actually that interesting. I think what most people want to know is how often in a Cochrane review is a conventional medical treatment found to have high quality evidence and the treatment works and the results were statistically significant. That's where most people are interested. And I think it's quite shocking to see that that's only 4% of the time. So these researchers summarize this in their conclusions saying, evidence of high quality is uncommon for medical and health-related interventions, and favorable evidence of high quality is even more uncommon. How I would express that, if we use the kind of wording that's used to describe homeopathy, is you can say only 4% of conventional treatments actually have high quality evidence showing they work. But this was some time ago. So it was really interesting to me that this kind of topic hit the headlines in 2022. Suddenly we saw this headline, we don't know whether most medical treatments work, and we know even less about whether they cause harm, says a new study. This study was by Howick et al., 2022, and what they did here was a very similar approach. They looked at all treatments tested in Cochrane reviews between 2008 and 2021. So the crucial difference here is much bigger data set, much more recent. Very, very interesting. This was 1,500 conventional treatments being assessed. What they concluded was that 95% do not have high quality evidence to support their benefits. So they concluded more than 9 in 10 healthcare interventions are not supported by high quality evidence, and actually slightly different topic than we're focusing on today, but they also alerted the world to the fact that harms are underreported. So they did it one way around. If you flip that the other way and say 5%, only 5% do have high quality evidence, that was reassuringly similar to the earlier study that found 4.1%. That's what you want to see, a replication that's very similar. So what I hope that shows you is that the evidence base for homeopathy is actually similar to that of a lot of conventional medical treatments. And certainly we can say that conventional medicine is less evidence-based than most people think, and homeopathy is more evidence-based than most people think. But I want to put even those results into further context. Grade results that are less than a high level of evidence, whether it's moderate, low, or very low, does not mean there is no evidence. It does not mean that the existing studies are invalid for some reason. All it means is that more research is needed to draw firm conclusions. And of course, lack of evidence does not equal lack of effect. This is something we know, but try telling that to the media. Just because a conventional or homeopathic treatment doesn't have this high level of evidence through grades saying that it definitely works, that doesn't mean that it does not work. And also, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but evidence-based should not only mean that there is a high level of research evidence. Grade analysis clarifies the certainty of research results, but that's all that it does. It should not be the only factor in clinical treatment decision-making. It should just be one thing in the pot with patient preference, with prescriber expertise and experience. So HRI's position in 2024 is that there is good quality scientific evidence showing homeopathy works. The existing data is not consistent with homeopathy being a placebo effect. The negative claims are based on either misinformation or a lack of knowledge of the evidence base. The level of evidence that we're focusing now for homeopathy is actually similar to that of many conventional medical treatments, and more high quality research is needed to explore the full potential homeopathy could play in integrated healthcare. But if I'm going to stand here and talk about the homeopathy debate, I really felt it was important to acknowledge the rather strange situation we've been living through, where our profession has been under consistent high-level attack for 2 decades. It's really quite something to reflect on. As many of you will know, the attack started very clearly in 2005 with a single study in The Lancet, probably the most prestigious journal in the world, where Shangatal drew this extraordinary conclusion saying homeopathy is definitely just a placebo effect. They said it was based on analysis of 110 trials, but when you actually analyze that paper, it turns out that the only way they could get that negative result was that they restricted their analysis to just 8 out of those 110 trials. If they'd done it any other way, it would have come out positive for homeopathy, so pretty shocking. Now, this story got stranger and bolder because the editor chose to do an editorial with that edition called The End of Homeopathy. And you'll probably know this quote: "Now doctors need to be bold and honest with their patients about homeopathy's lack of benefit." Still hard to read even now. So that, I think, was designed to be pretty much a killer blow for homeopathy back in 2005. But the attacks didn't end there, of course. We fast forward to 2011, and the next major attack came when there was what was called an evidence check, parliamentary evidence check, and this resulted in the Science and Technology Committee report. To do the long story short version, they looked at all sorts of things, but ultimately dismissed all evidence except Shang, and therefore concluded that homeopathy is nothing more than placebo. Fast forward to 2015, now the attacks go over to Australia. This is when the homeopathy evidence was reviewed by an Australian Government Research Institute, NHMRC, who draw their conclusion that there is no reliable evidence homeopathy is effective for any of the 61 conditions they assessed. This triggered media headlines all around the world saying homeopathy doesn't work. But when we unpacked this report, even though it looked really good on the surface, it's from a very credible institute, it all looked like it had been done properly, when you unpeeled the layers, we discovered that the findings were entirely determined by NHMRC's arbitrary definition of that word reliable. And they said there's no reliable evidence. They said that for a trial to be reliable, it had to have 150 people in it, and it had to have a perfect quality score of 5 out of 5 on the most commonly used rating scale at the time. Now, to understand how shocking that is, that definition has never, ever been used before or since in any study in the world by them or anyone else. It was completely made up for this study. We also discovered when we were digging through Freedom of Information requests, the second shock was that this report they published was not the first time they reviewed the evidence. They did it in 2012 originally, but never published it and buried it. And then they did it again and published this version. You'll recognize some of these logos for all the efforts that the homeopathy sector have made since 2015 to challenge this highly damaging and highly inaccurate report. HRI got involved with this in 2015, 2016, and I was reflecting on this, thinking about the lecture today, that it was quite a moment for myself and HRI when we first went public about the fact that we were really trying to take this report down. And that was announced and shared at the Faculty Congress in Belfast in 2016. And I remember lots of wine being drunk afterwards. I claim it was due to the stress of having to work with the Australian report, but that excuse is wearing a bit thin by now. Now, we were told at the time that this challenge we were doing, which is technically known as an ombudsman complaint, which is a quasi-legal process challenging the Australian government, basically, we were told by the lawyer, Teresa Nicoletti, that it would take probably a year. She said most of these take 6 months. This is really complex and high level, and there's a lot at stake for the Australian government, so probably a year. So I remember thinking, well, let's say 18 months to be on the safe side. It's heavy work, but let's do it. As many of you will know, it ended up going on for 7 years. That's what happens when you try and accuse an Australian government institute of bias, conflict of interest, misleading the public, and scientific misconduct. It gets nasty and protracted. But we've had some wins along the way. In 2019, their CEO actually was forced by the homeopathy sector's efforts to go on record publicly, and she put this in writing. Contrary to some claims, the review did not conclude that homeopathy was ineffective. Now, that might not sound like a massive win, but when you consider that to this day, when anyone ever says homeopathy doesn't work, we know it's placebo, patients shouldn't get it, people shouldn't prescribe it, they are only talking about this report. This is what they hold up, this single document. So when the CEO says we never said it didn't work, this is extremely important. The other success we had was the Release the First Report campaign. It was amazing to see how the whole world came together to sign this petition. To be honest, we never thought it would work, but it did work, and we actually forced them to release that first buried report that was never supposed to see the light of day, done by the lovely Professor Karen Grimmer, who's a superb researcher, and she found promising evidence for 5 medical conditions. We assume that's why they didn't want to publish it. And I know it might sound a little bit sad, but I have a printed copy of that in my desk that I keep every day just to remind myself that if you stick with something long enough, sometimes it actually works. But the Ombudsman complaint finally came to a close in August 2023, really abruptly. After the 7 years, it was really strange. We suddenly got notified that our caseworker, our last one, I think we got through 4, had left. She'd left the Ombudsman office, somebody else was in charge, and a couple of weeks later, bang, it's over, closed, and we got this message. It was not possible to engage a scientific expert, and in the absence of independent expert scientific expertise, we have not been able to conclusively determine those matters of scientific methodology. As you can imagine, that was pretty hard to take after 7 years of hard work, but actually not that surprising. There was kind of nowhere for them to go. And I am not at all surprised that there was no independent scientific expert when they were asked who was willing to step up and say whether we were right or the Australian government was right. Nobody would touch this. So I get asked a lot after all these years, 10 years now, what can we say about the famous, infamous Australian report? So we can say it never concluded that homeopathy doesn't work. We can say that the 7-year investigation ended with a non-verdict. No scientific expert was willing to go on the record to officially assess the evidence against NHMRC. But a verdict, actually, we wanted one, of course we did, but it's not needed to know that this report was clearly bad science. That is obvious to anyone who understands evidence reviews. What it does show you is how very hard it is to hold institutions to account, especially when it's a government. So, having talked about the key attacks, whether it's Shang or the evidence check or Australia, I did feel that it was important today to just take a second to appreciate how amazingly resilient our sector is. I think we have done an amazing job to still be in the race at all. I love that quote, to win the race, first you have to finish the race. It really does help to focus the mind. And I was thinking about, how are we still in the race? I mean, our opponents are few in number, but my God, they have clout. So This is really stating the obvious, but I do think it's again important to remember we are still here because we're right, because we know homeopathy works. Practitioners know it, patients know it. And that really, I honestly believe, is really the difference. That's what keeps us coming back to this every single day. And that's why we won't let them win. I also want to reflect on the fact that I honestly believe the attacks have strengthened and unified us. I honestly think in some ways they've done us a favor. I've seen changes over the last 20 years that I do not think would have happened if we hadn't been under attack. Because if we're honest, if we go back to 2008 was actually when the attacks really hit the headlines, when we were really suddenly under pressure. By 2011, by the time we got the evidence check, we are really feeling the heat in the UK. And we were a bit of a mess back then. I would say we were very divided. We had different factions in the UK, different organizations fighting, criticizing each other. There was no unity. We were also basically totally caught unawares. I think up till 2008, we'd all just been living a nice life, getting on, treating patients, learning homeopathy, teaching homeopathy, just doing good things, minding our own business. And then from nowhere, smack. Headlines, attacks, telling us what we can and can't do, can and can't say, saying we're dangerous, we're peddling placebos. From nowhere. We were not ready for that. But this was the best picture I could find. I honestly feel like if we look at the UK homeopathy sector today, we can be pretty proud of how far we have come since 2011. And how has that change come about? There really was a pivotal moment. That's why the whole date is there, Thursday, the 2nd of April, 2011. What happened was there was a meeting at the Royal London Homeopathic Hospital, as I still call it. We had representatives of the 8 key stakeholder organizations for UK homeopathy brought together to decide what we were going to do about these attacks. And I will never forget it because I remember walking into that room, and if I'm being totally honest here, looking at a couple of people and thinking, I'm not sure I can work with you because I disagree with you on a lot of things. And they were looking at me exactly the same way. And the tension in that room was palpable. But we were all in the room, we showed up because we knew that if we did not sort out our differences, homeopathy was going to get wiped out. So what we did was form this 4 Homeopathy Coalition. That's what it ended up being called. And today it has 11 organizations there. It has everybody from the prescribers to the pharmacists, to the colleges, to the research, the charities, and so on. What we've learned over these years, the hard way, is that collaboration is possible if you want it enough. We have more in common than we disagree on. Collaboration does not mean losing unique identities of each of these organizations. That took us a while to figure out. We can join together and still be ourselves. And we learned that unity really does facilitate any kind of interaction with the outside world. Once we were unified, we could start to be a sector that could talk to the rest of the world and deal with these attacks together. So if, we had the dubious honor in the UK that the attack started here, that also means that this unity started here. And when I look back at the work I've done with HRI over this time period, what we could see is it didn't stop there. We were very UK focused then, like everybody else, but over time, this coming together expanded around the world. Since 2014, we suddenly started working at a European level with the pharmacists, the medical prescribers, the non-medical prescribers, and the researchers. From 2015, that's when we started working directly with global organizations and people as far away, of course, as Australia, but also Hong Kong and India. In 2018, that was the next shift. That was the point at which I suddenly realized we were now helping people in America and Canada because they were under attack, and they were asking me and Alex Tournier, founder of HRI, to go over and help them because they were under attack. So the networks of HRI and the way that we've been collaborating has absolutely mirrored and reflected where the attacks have been around the planet and what it has done. These attacks have had an impact they were never meant to have. They have actually created a truly unified global homeopathy sector. And I think that is something very special and important to acknowledge today. Okay. But if we're still in the race, pretty much because we sorted ourselves out and we unified, that's great. But that's not the same as pushing past the anti-homeopathy campaigners. I would say that in 2025, even though we've come a really long way that we can be proud of, we cannot afford to be complacent or naive. We have to realize that science and politics have never been more intertwined. Being right doesn't guarantee you win, and truth does not always beat fake news, and there is a lot of fake news about homeopathy. To win this race and thrive, the sector really needs to be strong. We need to be so clear about what we know to be true, that millions of people use homeopathy. Patients value it because it works for them. Prescribers value it because it helps their patients. And homeopathy has an excellent safety record. The evidence base is not consistent with homeopathy being placebo effect. So this is what we just have to keep saying loud and clear. But we also need to continue to be self-reflective. I made myself really unpopular back in 2011 when I tried to point out during those first meetings that actually I thought the skeptics were right about some things, not everything, but they leveled some criticisms at our sector that I think were valid at that time. And if we looked at those, we could really improve. And we did. We looked at those weaknesses and we sorted them out. And I think that's something we need to do on an ongoing basis. And of course, we need to work together. I've already talked about the importance of unity and collaborations, but another aspect of this is common communications. In this digital era, we need to have common, clear messaging so that we can really break through the noise of misinformation. And that's where HRI tries to do our best to help the wider sector. We're very proud to have what's recognized as the #1 website in the world on homeopathy research. Hopefully you're familiar with our FAQs, which are now in 12 languages, which is a bit of a pain to maintain, but they're very widely used. And we have the essential evidence section, which is newer, where we just put key items we think you might want to know about. If you're already using the website, I just wanted you to be aware that last year we updated some key elements. Our #1 FAQ, just summarizing the key top-level evidence. Sorry, it's another number. We had the tricky job of reconciling Robert Matthys' data with Katarina Gertner's data and trying to come up with the number we felt we should all be talking about. We settled on 329 clinical studies because this is all the studies that have at least 2 groups. They're controlled, homeopathy against something else, but they are peer-reviewed. We feel like for HRI's website, we don't consider anything less than peer-reviewed publications. We've also done you an FAQ on safety. We've done one on cost effectiveness, and we've updated the homeopathy use page. That's all really nice recent data. The final tool that was created last year was just in December 2024. I just snuck it in at the end of the year. This is something we've been lacking for a long time, so I was very pleased to catch up with myself. I've just done a 6-page summary. It's not perfect, it will continue to evolve, but I really wanted everybody to have a single document. I've seen the power of single documents like the Australian report. I wanted people to have a single, easy to read, easy to understand document, just summarizing all the key points about the evidence, all the way from experimental research to clinical data. So I hope that will be of use to you. I also today wanted to acknowledge specifically the resilience of the homeopathy researchers. When I think about the homeopathy sector, I'm usually talking about everybody, all of us, but particularly the prescribers. If you think you're a bit persecuted at times as a homeopathic doctor, try and imagine what it's like to be a homeopathy researcher when the debate is around research. I mean, the challenges these people face, it's extraordinary. I'm just in awe of the people who do this work day in, day out. HRI is very proud to have reintroduced homeopathy research conferences in 2013. When we did that, there weren't any. There hadn't been any for over a decade. I had to speak to Peter Fisher and Rob Van Hasselen to find out when the last ones were because they ran them. And I think they told me that you can only do a 1-day event attached to other conferences. It doesn't really work to do on its own. Alex and I were not very interested in that. We felt like the homeopathy research world deserved a proper homeopathy research conference dedicated to this topic, to provide a professional platform for these researchers to present their latest findings. So every 2 years, we bring together all the researchers on every type of research in homeopathy, from plants to vets to clinical, put them together. They come from about 20 or 30 countries usually. We have 2.5 days, and that's where you really see the science come to life. We're really proud that if we look back over this series of conferences over this 10-year period, 2013 to 2023, and now we know all these researchers, you can really see how these events have fostered collaborations. People have met. There's a study right now, which is Leonie Bonneman from Brazil with Stephen Cartwright in Oxford. You know, that would not have happened without our conferences. So we're really proud to have nurtured this sector and helped them to really thrive over this period, despite the ongoing attacks. We're having our next one in 3 months. I'm trying not to think about the fact it's only 3 months away. There's a lot to do. But I'm looking forward to welcoming everybody to Greece in June to do more of the same. If we look at our keynote speakers, I think it really shows you the high level of homeopathy research today. We have 2 fantastic professors from Brazil. Pedro Boff is going to be talking about the use of homeopathic medicines with crops. Professor Briccarello is going to be, she's a vet, she's going to be talking about the use of homeopathic medicines with livestock. Daniel Gallego Perez is going to talk about his experience working with the WHO on TCIM and his vision for how homeopathy might find its place in that emerging framework. Professor Osterman, if you know him from Germany, he's the man on cost effectiveness. And Professor Ashley Ross, who is also one of HRI's trustees, is of course a world expert in provings of new homeopathic medicines. So I wanted to show you that just to show you the flavor of our conferences, deliberately bringing everyone together, but also to appreciate the high level of work going on today in our field. I also wanted to take the opportunity today on behalf of Alex Tournier, the founding chairman of HRI, and myself, just to say thank you to everyone who has helped HRI over the years, many of whom are in this room, far too many to mention, but I do need to say a specific thank you to Dr. Elizabeth Thompson and the late Peter Fisher, who were involved with HRI from day one. Liz was on our board for 10 years. Peter was on our scientific advisory committee throughout and talking in our ears in a very nice way to help guide us as we were coming from sort of the next generation and the newbies on the block. He really held our hands a lot of the way. And of course, I need to thank the current HRI team. We're very proud. We're so small, but this is the biggest we've ever been. So we're proud of our 8 people. These are amazing individuals, whether it's communications, events, or of course, our amazing academic team. I'm so proud of them. These are really, truly dedicated individuals who really generate great work every day. So to revisit this great quote, I just wanted to end with 2 thoughts, really. The first is that I have to say it gives me immense pleasure to point out that as we are all here now in 2025, the Lancet editor clearly got it very, very wrong 20 years ago. So that's what I think of that. And I would rather leave you with this quote that I feel is a much more accurate representation of the amazing resilience of the homeopathy sector. She stood in the storm, and when the wind did not blow her away, she adjusted her sails. We have had so many storms come our way over 20 years, but I honestly believe that as the next ones come, we will adjust our sails and we will survive all of them for the next 20 years and beyond. Thank you very much.